Hi, thank you for joining me here on JNS TV in our studios in Jerusalem, Israel. I'm Daniel Seaman, and as you noticed, I'm diverting from my usual routine, not going into my monologue, but I want to go into the major stories that have been in the news this week and address them, give you some of my insights into what Israelis are dealing with here, and also how the foreign press has been covering things on other stories and how they've been manipulating the news and giving you a false impression of things here in Israel the past week as well. So the first issue the first big issue in the news this week is obviously the request by Prime Minister Netanyahu asking to be pardoned by the President of Israel. It's a very unusual process here in Israel. Usually you can't ask for a presidential pardon until you've been accused or found guilty, etc. I know in the United States they have this process where we saw just last year, around this time last year, with President Biden pardoned all this list of people so they couldn't be prosecuted. We also remembered when President Trump was here that he made this request of the Israeli president, which was very unusual in Israeli politics. It's very sensitive. It's a very sensitive issue here because anybody following the trial, it is very clear that he was, or what you call this, lawfare, that the Prime Minister was unduly accused of a series of accusations that here in the trial right now, it is all being exposed that not only are the accusations don't hold water, but the whole process itself was illegal from the start. Unlike in the United States, where a judge can call off a trial, here in Israel, that process doesn't exist. They have to fulfill the process itself. I'm not a big legal expert, but these little items I'm familiar with, just so you know how the process is different here than what you may be aware of in the United States or Britain for that matter. So here, despite all of this, it's still going on. For many Israelis, what they're happy about in this process, and one of the reasons they've been a bit disappointed with the Prime Minister, I'm talking about those who support him, is that they felt that finally he was exposing the deep state in Israel, or the fact that you have these government officials who are trying to dictate to the duly elected government in Israel their own political opinions and directions. And when they don't do this, or let's take the Prime Minister, for example, when they don't want him to be Prime Minister, they'll do everything to get him out of office. And so what was happening now is what he was exposing in the court case, all the deficiencies and the lies that were accumulated by the system itself, meaning by the prosecutors, by the Israel police, etc. The next phase, which is supposed to become, he's supposed to complete his defense this week, and then the defense is supposed to start asking questions of the prosecution. And here, many Israelis were finally waiting for them to raise the issues with the Israel police, with the investigators, with the prosecutors, and raise the issues of their failures and expose everything that's going on here. So obviously, many of them are disappointed that this is not going to happen. On the practical level, the Prime Minister asking for this, it's very simple. A lot of money is going into this. He was not granted legal counsel and defense by the government. He has to pay for it himself. The same prosecutors did not allow him to do a public, and there was about 2 million shekels in private money gathered in one of these money gathering things for the Prime Minister for his case. He was not allowed to have access to that. They insisted that he use his own money. So this is costing him a lot, but it's also unusual, the court case has been, is that he's been asked to be in court for 3 to 4 days a week, which any prosecutor or any defense attorney in Israel can tell you this is not only unusual, it has never happened before in the history of legal processes here in Israel, where it's beyond a day or two a week. Also, the defense lawyers themselves, they have other cases that they represent. So their focus and their entire time is spent on this. Not to mention the fact that this is not the average or simple person accused. This is the Prime Minister of the State of Israel. And if 6 years ago, when the legal process began, they asked him, can you go to court spend all this time in court and still run the country? He said yes. But 6 years ago, we weren't in the midst of a war of survival. So things changed over the past year. And then when you look at why is the insistence of the court that he be there for 4 or 5 days a week or 3 or 4 days a week, it's because one of the judges, she's to retire in 2 years, and she wants to be able to give her decision before then. because she knows this will be what she's remembered for. And so she's insisting, because this court case can go on for several years, and she wants to wrap it up within 2 years so that she can have her name on the decision. So it's because of these personal things that this is going on for so long, so intensely, and taking away from the prime minister's ability to do his job. Now, beyond that, they are considerate at times, but they have to present to the judges if there are issues that the prime minister of the state of Israel in a war, that if he has something that he has to deal with, either with the international community or president of the United States, or matters of security, they'll allow him not to appear in court that day. So what you're actually doing here, especially if it comes to matters of security, is you're giving advance notice to our enemies that the prime minister won't be in court tomorrow because he has something of security matter that he has to deal with. So in a way, you're giving them advance notice of things, and we know how important the secrecy is in all of this. So the level of absurdity in all of this is astounding, and yet they keep insisting on him doing this. So it just makes sense, and especially since it is quite clear that the accusations do not hold water, if you want to call it that it makes sense for if the president of Israel can give him an advance pardon, he will do it. It was done once before in the history of Israel. It was done for members of the Shin Bet in a case when there was an incident with terrorists who abducted bus number 300 en route to Ashkelon back 40 years ago, in which terrorists were killed and their behavior was questioned. And so not to go into the details, the president at the time, the president of Israel, granted them a pardon without accepting of guilt in their case. This created a great commotion here in Israel. Obviously, members of the right wing, as I mentioned before, were sort of disappointed, but they understand that the prime minister needs to have his time available to him to address the issues that Israel is dealing with. But on the left wing, they're saying no, they want to condition it. Two things, that he accept guilt, though this has not been the case and has not been the direction of the court case itself, and that he says he can no longer run for prime minister. Well, the whole thing was done, the whole process here, the whole lawfare that they've been using was to get him and any normal human being and many members of the Israeli government and top leaders in Israel have stepped down when this whole process, because they've used it before against other political, including President Rivlin, including there are a few others that this process was used to get them to back off and remove them themselves from their positions. They wanted to do this with the prime minister. He stood up to it. He did not back off. He's leading the charge against them. And now they want to do, okay, if we can't make you retire, then if you want to be found or receive the pardon, you have to step down now. Well, forget what the prime minister thinks on this. He has a huge majority of the population in Israel that will have nothing of the sort. And they have to leave it up to us. We have an election it could be in 3 months, but until the end of November 2026, there will be elections in Israel. And then the population here, the public, can determine whether or not they want Netanyahu to be prime minister. It is not for the opposition, who obviously have an interest in him resigning. It is not for them to present that condition, especially since that never happened before. So what is going to happen? It's hard to tell. There's so many different directions this can go in. It may take a couple of weeks or even longer. The president said that he's going to be discussing this with several people. It's hard to say what does he actually have to discuss. You either decide to do it or not. There has been pressure is being applied to him. There are demonstrations now. The same idiots who have been demonstrating since Netanyahu was elected in the streets of Israel every time, finding another excuse after them accusing him of not caring about the hostages and wanting to have the war continue to preserve his position in government, since he did reach a ceasefire and since he was able to have the release, since he was able to release all of the hostages except for 2 bodies that are still being held. They have nothing to demonstrate on now, so now they're making an issue out of this, directing their efforts against the president, threatening him that they will not let this go by if he accepts Netanyahu's request. So this has become a huge political matter here. And if you consider the fact that the President Herzog is considering a return to Israeli politics and perhaps leading the Labor Party in the future, or some other party if he decides to do that, it may not be in his best interest to do that. So your guess is as good as mine. I want to hope that he does address what I believe is the major issue that Netanyahu raises in this topic, which is very simply, and Prime Minister said, yes, the court case is inconvenient. It is costing him. It is making his life miserable and his family's life miserable. But he wants to, first off, end this trial and, what he says, restore the stability inside of Israel and lower the fury that's in the streets and have restore unity. That's not going to happen, not because of him, because the same people who have taken to the streets for so long, they don't care about the democracy, they don't care about unity, they don't care about what's going on here in Israel. They just want to remove the political party and the political person that they object to, which is Netanyahu. So it's nice of him to say that, but that's not the real issue. The real issue is something that he said very clearly at the end, is that we are in the midst of not only a war of our survival, and as we call it, the restoration of the state of Israel. There is tectonic shifts and changes, and I've addressed these several times in previous talks and podcasts. There's major changes occurring right now in the Middle East. And there are things, many of the things we're not even aware or familiar with, and things that are going on from the Far East, through the Middle East, through Europe, and even the things in Venezuela, as I addressed last week in my conversation and my podcast last week. Even the issues in Venezuela have connections to what is happening here in the Middle East, to Iran, etc., and Hezbollah. So there are major shifts and major things happening, and he has to have his full attention on that. And that's what he wants to do for the future of the state of Israel. And I know the man, 40 years. I worked with him for many years. I know that his first concern is the survival of the Jewish people and the future of the Jewish people. So I believe he is very sincere in this, and that's what he wants to have his attention on, and that's what the whole country should be. So if the president of Israel, if Herzog really is concerned about the people of Israel and wants to be a future leader, I think that he should latch on to this position of Prime Minister Netanyahu, and together, both of them, go through with this, allow the pardon, end this farce of a court case, and let the leaders of Israel focus on two things. First, the future of Israel, the war that is happening here, and the security threats of Israel, and then go to the elections in 6 months, 9 months, or 10 months from now when it's supposed to happen. But we'll be getting into an election process sometimes towards the summer, hopefully not before. We have perhaps the best and most supportive American administration that we could have ever asked for, an administration that is totally in line with us and as we see as our security needs. They have other interests that don't always align, but they understand that this government in Israel and the state of Israel will direct its efforts for its own interests and its own security interests. And so that we didn't have from previous administrations, and we may not have that in the future. So we have with this administration 3 more years, and we only have 1 year in which this present government is still seated in Israel. We don't know what will happen after the next elections. So Prime Minister is very much focused on the next few months, at least setting us in the direction of this change in the Middle East, which will be important to the state of Israel and to security of the Israeli people. I do mention the security issues, and that is the other issue we're dealing with this week. The Prime Minister had a conversation with President Trump, and they discussed the events. Last week, there was an incident in Syria. Elements of this present Syrian regime were, besides their assault against the minorities in the areas bordering along the Israeli forces in Syria, there was also an ambush directed against Israeli soldiers in Syria. And Israel took them out and made it very clear that they will no longer tolerate and will not accept any attempt to allow extreme Islamic jihadist forces to move south in Syria and to establish themselves along not only the current positions of Israel, but certainly the border with Israel. Now, we've moved in to areas of Syria that we took back in the 73 war, and in an agreement with the Syrian government at the time, Israel moved back under the condition that there is a ceasefire and they don't violate it. Well, they violated it, and they not only supported Hamas, but they used their own territory to fire against Israel, thus violating that agreement. Israel moved in back into those areas and is also providing security to the Druze minority and different Christian minorities in Syria. Israel has made it very clear that under current conditions, we're not moving back. Now, this puts us not in a conflict, but as we know, President Trump has been trying to elevate the status of Julani, the current leader of Syria, and he wants to make sure that Israel doesn't take him out. Well, Prime Minister Netanyahu made it very clear we have no intention of doing that. But at the same time, post-October 7th, Israel is no longer in the situation we were before, neither with Hezbollah in Lebanon or with the terrorist elements in Syria. We're not going to allow them to create any threat, no longer to the public in the state of Israel. So that was one of the incidents. The other one was in Lebanon. In Lebanon, we reached several months ago a ceasefire in which the Lebanese government was supposed to disarm Hezbollah. They tried doing it. It was very difficult for them to do it, even though Hezbollah was weakened just last year by the efforts on the part of the state of Israel. Not only did we take out the members of the Hezbollah that was back in September last year, but also this month, exactly a year ago, Syria fell apart, and the support that the Syrians gave to Hezbollah and the arms route that came from Iran through Syria to Hezbollah was detached. And so they're still trying to do it. Unfortunately, we're discovering that Turkey may be very much involved in arming Hezbollah and transferring weapons to them through Syria. But in Hezbollah itself, in Lebanon, though weakened, they still have political strength, and they refuse to disarm. And this was one of the conditions of the ceasefire. So last week, we took out the chief of staff of the Hezbollah, and they did not respond because they lacked the abilities to do it. Just to remind you here, and a few months before the October 7th war, Hezbollah built a position on the border with Israel, on the fence, along the fence with Israel in the north of Israel. And Israel at that time did not take them out. It was a tent with a few soldiers. We didn't even take it out when the soldiers weren't there. They were manning it from time to time. That was the circumstances at the time because we knew they had several tens of thousands of missiles directed in the direction of Israel, not to mention that if they would use it, Iran would then also fire their missiles. Today, that threat no longer exists, but Hezbollah have been attempting to restore that. They've been building positions, restoring the arms and missiles. Same thing, by the way, happening in Gaza with Hamas. With all the aid coming in and all these trucks coming in that are not being supervised. We know that a lot of munitions are being brought in to Hamas. We know they have several missile batteries that are ready to fire against the south of Israel. We're not going to let these things happen. And these are the issues that Israel is dealing with Syria, with Lebanon, and also with Iran. And there's been a lot of talk here that Israel will have to complete the military matters with these three elements. Basically, Hamas, they have to be disarmed completely. But the reason we're not moving in at the moment in Gaza is because we're waiting to receive the two last bodies. We know they know where they're at, but they're playing games. They were supposed to return them after 72 hours. They did not do that. But we're waiting, hoping for that to happen. And then there's also the possibility of having a foreign troops come in from, it could have been Indonesia. There was talk of Turkey, Egypt. Israel refuses to allow Turkish or Egyptians to be in there or in this peace force that is supposed to move in. But many countries have refused to do it as long as Hamas are still armed. So in this case, it'll probably end up with Israel having to do the dirty work. And then once that's done, they can move in and begin the restoration of the Gaza Strip as they're speaking about, or as the plan, as one of the points of the plan stated a few months ago. So this probably will also be an issue that will be raised. And they're talking now about December 26th, at least here in Israel, that Netanyahu will be in Washington again. I don't see how the day after Christmas he's going to be there, but we'll see. With regards to Iran, also, they've been restoring their capabilities. And at the moment, we still have the upper hand, so we may see an Israeli effort. Another important element in all of this is that this month, the laser technology, anti-missile technology, has been completed. And by the end of this month, there are already some of the batteries are set up. Some of them were used in combat during the 2 years of the war. This special technology that Israel developed with lasers, the ability to take out intercontinental ballistic missiles, something that it was thought to be Star Trek, as President Reagan said it 40 years ago, science fiction. Israel succeeded in doing that, and these will be installed, and the air defense of Israel will be complete by the end of December, towards the beginning of January, which gives us total defense, at least, from the serious missile threat from Iran, which will allow us to then complete what it may be necessary with the Iranians next month. So these are the major issues with if you're taking the countries around Israel. But there's also a battle that's been going on in the recent weeks, and it's only been becoming more and more difficult, which is against the terrorist elements in Judea and Samaria, in the areas of the Palestinian Authority. Now, just to put this in the broader context of things, the Palestinian Authority are in Judea and Samaria based on the Oslo Accords. And I've told you several times, I began working on behalf of Israel back in the 1980s when I finished my military service, and I worked in the United States and been working with Israel public diplomacy all these years. I remember back then, the pressure on Israel was that if we, and many of you around my age will remember this, that if Israel recognizes the PLO, which they said were the only representative of the Palestinian people, if we recognize the PLO, if we cede territory, there'll be peace. We'll be able to have, and they raised and praised the two-state solution to the conflict here. Well, that was done. Israel in 1994 in the Oslo Accords recognized the PLO. They were supposed to recognize Israel's right to having an independent state. They conditioned it, meaning that they will have their right to their state, but it will not be a Jewish state in the territory of Israel. Israel will be a democratic state, which will not be recognized as a Jewish state. But that's a side issue. The fact of the matter is that they went on a terrorist campaign. And then you discover that it's not the PLO, which are the only representative of the Palestinian people. You have the PFLP. You have the Islamic Jihad. You have Hamas. How surprising. Hamas, who controlled Gaza, that was ceded to the PLO back in 1994. So this didn't bring this solution to the situation. And after October 7th, very few Israelis entertained the idea of continuing of having a Palestinian state, or even allowing the PLO to be responsible for the areas in Gaza that will be restored in the future. And in the meantime, the same areas that the PLO, or the Palestinian Authority, the PA, are supposed to be responsible for, you have growing cells of Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and beyond that, PLO terrorists who are fighting Israel and arming themselves for a future assault. And many of them are saying there will not be one October 7th, not 10, not 100, not 1,000, 10,000 October 7th. These are the things that they're mimicking and echoing in Judea and Samaria among the Arabs there, that they intend to do what Hamas did on October 7th. And it's a very interesting article this week that I'll be interviewing the gentleman Nadav Etzni tomorrow on my radio show on Galei Israel here in Israel. And he talks about the partners, our peace partners, the PLO. And he mentions that this week in an incident in Shechem, that our soldiers were injured by a member of the Palestinian police. Now, why is this important? And he does address the issue, because the Palestinian police were supposed to be the only force that the PA have that is to police their own forces. They were not supposed to have any security elements. The borders are protected and defended by Israel. Therefore, they do not need a military. And if we signed a peace treaty with them, recognizing them, ceding territory to them, why do they need military forces for? So the interesting thing that he raises, that originally the Palestinian police were supposed to be 18,000 police officers. Now they're over 60,000. 60,000 police. But they're not being trained in police tactics. They're being trained not only by the United States, and the CIA have been training them also, but training them military training. And it's also, they're getting military training from the EU and from other countries around the world. And he says that they're allowed to go and train in Jordan, Pakistan, Algeria, and experimenting in classical military infantry tactics, as well as tank corps and artillery. Why do they need to be trained in all of this? And he goes on and it says that over the past years, through Jordan, there have been weapons smuggled into Judea and Samaria to the Palestinian Authority areas of heavy weapons. That includes machine guns and missiles, etc. So we see that they're not only violating it, but they're very clearly going into the direction that is very similar to what Hamas did on October 7th, 2023. And it's important to mention that for years, Israel sort of ignored the buildup of the munitions among Hamas. There was these things that would be investigated, but the general attitude of the IDF at the time was on this particular issue, that the Hamas want to fortify their position as the leadership in Gaza, and therefore they have no interest. And any attack, any missile attack, any of the incidents that they created over the years were excused by, unfortunately, the Israeli military elements as being, no, these are the PFLP or the Islamic Jihad or other terrorist elements. It is not the Hamas. And unfortunately, many of the indications, the intelligence indications that went towards the fact that they were planning an assault on Israel, a surprise attack, were discarded, even though the military echelon and top military leadership received that information. They stuck to their perception of what they thought the Hamas was planning, and they even did not relay this information to the government of Israel, who are those who are supposed to make the decisions. This is part of the problem that we have in Israel that is still has yet to be addressed in whatever inquiry the country of Israel decides to have on what predated the October 7th war. So you have similar things happening, and this is the concern that Nadav Aetzny raises in his article, that if we look at what Hamas did on October 7th, when they infiltrated Israel, they reached the areas of Ofakim and even a little south of that, which is 23 kilometers into Israel. 23 kilometers they were able to enter Israel. And if they do it anywhere from Judea and Samaria, that first off, if you know the topography in the area, it overlooks all of the center of Israel. But 23 kilometers from the closest area, it's a 7-mile, about 15 to 18 kilometers, you do the math, from the Green Line, or from an area where the Palestinian city exists, Tulkarem or something like that. It's 7 miles to the beaches of Israel. So they could pose a serious threat, something that even Hamas weren't successful in doing. So we have to be aware of this and address this and make sure that these terrorist elements do not continue perpetrating their attempts at attacking Israel in Judea and Samaria. I want to also address some of the issues that I saw on the foreign media and coverage of what is going on here. As I said before, there's not a major issue they can point. They still continue with the genocide and the hunger. If you look at these images, you can see that while they speak of hunger, or you had the weather in Israel was a little wintry the past weeks, and there was a little flooding in the Gaza Strip, you had these images coming out. Again, the Pallywood images, the Gazawood images of children drowning in the mud. And you can see this one image here of these children. It's so terrible that one of the girls in that image has her head on backwards. Pay attention to that. And other images are talking about the hunger and they don't have enough food. Well, that the foreign press will be showing you, but they don't show you images such as this taken from Gazan Instagram posts of restaurants and a wedding area. And look at the food that they have there. Look at the wealth that you can see. This is not a genocide or starvation. So these are the kind of things that sort of people are starting to realize that now and looking less at that. So they have to look for other things. And one of the things that they're looking for, if I go back to the security issues in Judea and Samaria, is the question of the presence of Jews there. And the fact that there are Jewish communities, and the fact that the PLO have also been violating the agreement, the Oslo agreement, by moving into areas that are to be discussed for the future decision on who these areas will belong to. And they've been settling these areas. So obviously, Jewish communities and Jewish settlers have taken it upon themselves to make sure that they can't invade areas that are supposed to be and that are known to be owned by Jews themselves. So these kind of things are being addressed as settler violence. And anytime there's an incident, nobody talks about what happens before. They never give you the full picture. They always are very quick to point the finger and direct attention to the response of Israelis. So if you have rocks thrown at you, and believe me, if you've ever had a rock thrown at you and you know that it can kill you, we've had several people killed by these things in the past, but it's also shootings that are happening, drive-by shootings. All these things are not reported in the media, or they're reported in passing, but at a time when Israelis then try to defend themselves, this immediately reaches the headlines. And by media who are reflecting the positions of their own countries, who have been saying for a very long time, and I mentioned this in one of my previous podcasts, that suddenly the September New York conference, which everybody was talking about the creation of a Palestinian state, and they were all working on this, that they should have, the Judea and Samaria should be recognized as part of the Palestinian area, once the peace process or the peace agreement and the end of the war came about. Nobody's talking about that right now because they understand the PLO cannot have full control of these areas. They're no different than the Hamas is. So what they're doing is echoing, these media outlets are echoing their government's positions and trying to delegitimize, first off, Jewish right to not only self-defense, but also to self-determination, and claiming that these areas are illegally occupied according to international law, which is just a statement that is not backed by international law. So I want to look at this thing of foreigners coming here, and they're usually activists and agents provocateurs who are coming here to create tensions between the Jews and the Arabs in Judea and Samaria. Now, in most of the areas in Judea and Samaria, Jews and Arabs live freely. If you're here in Jerusalem, you can see it. East Jerusalemites work and live and throughout the Jewish areas. No Jew can be in their areas talking about apartheid. But let's look at this thing from The Guardian. The headline is, Israeli settlers attack and rob Italian and Canadian volunteers in what they call the West Bank. Now, just to show you how they focus on these kind of incidents, and they have their echo chamber that spreads these kind of things. This was an item that was several hours before. When I was looking for it, somebody posted it on social media, and when I was looking for it, 12 hours had passed. But when you go into Google and The Guardian, the first item, 12 hours later, is this issue. So they put the focus on events with Israel, or negative events on Israel, to create, sort of spread this negative talk about Israel. But more interesting is that when you go into the article itself, you can see that there are 3 Italians and a Canadian were attacked on Sunday morning, where they had volunteered to help protect the Palestinian population. Look at these keywords, how they warp the meaning of things. They're political activists. They come there to create provocations with the Israelis, and they encourage the Arabs to attack the Israelis, but they're there to protect them. But that's one thing. Interesting enough, when they talk about the incident itself, they say, they shouted insults at us, not in English, not in Italian, not even in Hebrew. They shouted insults at us in Arabic and told us we have no right to be there. Why were they yelling at them in Arabic if they were attacking these Western provocators? So it's not the first time that you had these in Gaza years ago, these people who come and supposedly assist the Arabs there, and the Arabs end up killing them. But here you have the same thing. If one of them is killed, they're going to point the finger at Israel anyway. So you want to think, you think they were incapable of doing that thing? Look at what they did to foreign workers who lived in the area around Gaza, they didn't care who they were. If it served their purpose, they killed them. So just talking about this incident itself, they go into UN figures. Now, the UN figures are by organizations that are run by Arabs who live in Judea and Samaria, just like in the Gaza Strip. You can't have somebody who's not a member of the leadership in those areas, whether it's the PLO or the Hamas. Nobody can be a member of any international organization, albeit even members of the media. So they provide them that 1,000 Palestinians, including 233 children, were killed by Israel just in the last year alone. So they're making up these numbers that can never be verified, that if you do try to look into it, and I mention this again, why am I saying this? Very simply, how often, not the past year, not in the past 10 years, not in the past 30 years, 50 years now, every time they level accusations in Israel, and then when it is looked into and verified, it comes out that they were lied to. And then they make their corrections. And I did this again in a previous podcast, talked about specifics on this issue, on this particular issue, where the media corrects itself, but then a week later, they're repeating the same things, knowing that these people have lied to them before. And then they quote a Palestinian activist. And the name of this activist is Tamimi. Remember that name? Remember that woman who assaulted a soldier a few years ago and was then held because she's blonde? And then the West, the activists, the pro-Arab activists, were hailing her as some kind of political activist. That's a family known to be a terrorist family. And so, but he's the source they go to. And he says that they recruit foreign volunteers to help protect the Palestinian villages. So they sort of create this impression of a reality and then go on and create this impression of Israeli violence when in reality, none of this is really happened the way that they're doing it. Looking at a few other items, just to give you another impression about the echo chamber that you're dealing with when you have foreign media covering here. I saw an item this week, again, have nothing to do right now with the Arab-Israeli conflict or the security situation here. This has to do with internal issues in Israel. And this was an item that was taken from The Forward, which shouldn't be surprising knowing where they're coming from politically. And just to see the echo chamber that I'm talking about, there's a report there about something came out of Israel itself that more than 25% of Israelis are considering leaving Israel. It's always been an issue. It's always been a matter. How many leave, don't leave. They're going into this issue itself. But the angle where they're coming from it is very political. Just look at the subheadline is, Israel was founded on principles that its leaders no longer honor. And why do I mention this? Because when you have this fight of those people saying, I'm a Jew, but I'm not a Zionist, and I support Israel, but I do not support this government, sort of conditioning the fact that don't blame me because I'm not like them. And it just reminds me of this joke I saw on social media this week, and it says a Zionist and an anti-Zionist enter a bar, and the bartender says to them, we don't serve Jews here. Just to get the batter, just the same way is in the concentration camps and in the extermination camps. Nobody cared if you were right-wing, left-wing, Ashkenazi, Sephardic, left-wing Jew, Reform Jew. We were all despicable Jews in their eyes, and that's all they care about. But there's still this element among us that believe that they have to show that they're not like these bad Jews, as if there are bad Jews in this sense. So they're taking their information from the Israel Democracy Institute, which also is a left-wing funded organization, and also interviewing Gilad Kariv, who's a member of the left-wing party in Israel, in the Knesset of Israel. And they're all talking about this issue of how the Israelis trying to show, not address the issue, why are Israelis really leaving, but trying to turn it into a political issue that Israelis are leaving because of what the government is doing here. And then they go into, now, yes, there is the war that's been going on. It's the civilians were attacked here. Our cities were attacked by Iran and by Hezbollah and by Hamas. Missiles, there were many civilians who were killed. It raises questions. It raises, do you want to bring these are legitimate concerns that people have. But what they refer to here is that in recent years, Israel's leaders have failed to nurture the investment in the connection to the state of Israel. And why are they saying that? That they're violating what Ben-Gurion wanted. Now, Ben-Gurion, I remind you, was 70 years ago. There's a whole new Israel today. There's a stronger connection, not to the socialist seeds that started this country, but to what brought us back to this country, our Jewish identity. And that's what the Israelis are supporting today. And that's what there's this awakening of Israelis to that. It's not a government imposing that. It's not a right-wing government in Israel that is making the lives miserable. The only place they're demonstrating in Israel are the kibbutzim, which are all over, but are less than 2% of the population here, and the population of Tel Aviv, who do not accept the legitimacy of this government because they are politically opposed to them. So instead of turning it into a political debate, they turn it into a life or death matter, that we're changing the character of the state of Israel. And so they go quote these statistics given by the Institute of National Security Studies. It says 72% of Israelis were dissatisfied with the government's handling of the war, and showing that supposedly, and because before that, in the sentence before that, and I'm quoting from the document, it says, in a country steered by power-hungry and extremist right-wing government. So you're combining this just to show you how they manipulate the details. This is one thing that, and this is not a fact, this is something that they say. And I just remind you, they said for months that Netanyahu was going to continue the war because he wants the war to remain in power. And second, he doesn't care about the hostages. He's not going to release the hostages. And when he did all of that and reached this the agreement to end the war, suddenly what are they going to say? So they have to look for other things. So they're trying to create this impression that the public were not happy. The public before September, before the war came to an end, were not happy because they felt the government was not pursuing the two most important parts of this war. One, the release of the hostages, which was achieved, and two, the annihilation of Hamas. Not only the disarming, getting rid of Hamas totally. That's what Israelis were not happy about. It had nothing to do with the political position of the government. If anything, they were supporting Netanyahu's insistence on two things: going in and pressuring Hamas and not giving in to their attempts to extort us, which proved to be the right thing to do, because only after we moved in on Gaza did they finally make the concessions and release all the living prisoners. But beyond that, you also have the situation that we're dealing with today. You had the situation where there was about 240 Hamas members, those who were took part in the attacks of October 7th, caught in one of the tunnels in Rafah. This tunnel was in Israeli area. We did not allow them to leave. There was pressure coming in from the military in Israel that we should be considerate, let them leave, and they'll return the bodies that they're still holding. The prime minister said under no condition. And if you did conduct a poll with Israelis, this 72% that they mentioned here are the same ones who did not want them to release those Hamasniks in the tunnels. And what happened? We did not release them. They are now, some of them tried to attack Israeli soldiers, were killed, others surrendered, but a vast majority of them were stuck in there. We have finally attacked the tunnel. They're probably all dead right now. And wow, the world did not fall apart because of that. On the contrary, it sent a very clear message to Hamas. So warping these details to try to leave other people or readers with the impression that their political position here is what Israelis share, that is not only a misrepresentation, it's a total lie. The devil omits and manipulates the details to get their opinion across. And going back to another item that I found in the foreword, and this is not the foreword itself, but while looking at this article that they wrote about what is happening in Israel. And by the way, going back to it, talking about Israelis wanting to leave. Yes, there's been an increase in the number of Israelis wanting to leave Israel. But when you go into the details, you find out that many of them were Jews who came here, or people, not all of Jews, but people who came here from the Ukraine and Russia over the past few years of the war there, received these benefits from Israel to be here. When the benefits finished after 2 years, they decided to leave. It's not in any way denying that Israelis are leaving, but this is something we dealt with over the years. Even I left Israel for a few years. I was 6 years, lived in New York City, worked at the consulate in New York. not as a diplomat, worked there as a local employee, and I went to school in New York. I came back, as do many other Israelis. So this is not something that doesn't happen. It's not to show that it's because of this or that government. But when you look at the table that I'm showing you here, the World Population Review of just last year showed that Israel is number 5 in countries where the population are the happiest. And this is Israel in a 2-year war in which civilians have been attacked, and yet Israel is still one of the happiest populations in the world. So somehow it doesn't fit with what the forward was trying to present as a case of Israel falling apart because of this government. And by the way, it's not because of the government that people are so happy. It's just that our life here, the meaning that we find in our lives here, the family element, again, something that I discussed in previous podcasts with the chief psychologist of Israel, the sense of community that we have here, the sense of religious identity that we have here, the fact that we have children and grandchildren. Those are the things that create a situation where Israelis are happy with the lives we live here, certainly after the 2,000 years of diaspora. But going back, the item I saw on the it had to do with a restaurant opening near Columbia in New York City, in which they wanted to use the name or something on the menu that was going to commemorate a child killed in Gaza, and they wanted to call the phrase "from the river to the sea." And why am I mentioning this? Because they say here, and this is the way you see how they manipulate things, a phrase frequently used by pro-Palestinian activists that Jewish watchdogs view as a call for Israel's destruction. You see, it's not that they're calling for Israel's destruction, that if you ask them, they'll tell you, they'll admit to it, that that is exactly what they mean from the river to the sea. And by globalizing the Intifada, it's not only against Israel, it's against Jews. So it's not a watchdog that is saying this, it's the Arabs themselves saying it. But they try to condition this to present them in some kind of nice, they don't really mean these things. Yes, they mean it. And after October 7th, we trust and we believe them. But going back to the menu itself, they're talking about an incident in when a 6-year-old Palestinian girl was killed in Gaza. And they accuse Israel of it. But then they add, the Israeli military denied responsibility for her death. But a Washington Post investigation found Israeli military armored vehicles were present in the area. Oh, what do you know? They were present. So I go into the Washington Post article and I look into it. They give you a link to it. They don't quote it precisely. And in that link, you find that there was no evidence of Israeli firing. Yes, there was Israeli presence there, but they don't tell you, were they 5 meters away? Were they in the vicinity? No. So there's no evidence of Israel actually firing in that direction. And we know how often that when the Hamas or the PFLP or the Islamic Jihad or any of the other elements there fire in the direction of Israel, they are not only hiding behind the civilians, they don't care how many of their own civilians that they kill. But what do they care? Again, one of these items that they'll give you and present it and frame it in a way that makes Israel look bad because they're not worried about the facts. They're worried about creating this impression and committing you to have this impression about the state of Israel. So basically, as you can see from this supposedly boring week here in Israel, when there was not one major event happening, there's always something interesting happening here. Jews is news, Israel is interesting, and the press will always find ways to try to manipulate your thinking and get you to side with what they're trying to create, the impression they're trying to create. Never a dull moment here. We live in interesting times, obviously. So hopefully, things will quiet down next week, but I doubt it, to be honest. Thank you for listening here. Again, I'm Daniel Seaman. You've been watching Straight Up on JNS TV. Be with you next week again. Thank you very much.